Ani bonjour, everybody. My name is Bailey Walkie. I'm the founder of Frayed Feathers and the host of the Frayed Feathers podcast. I'm a youth reconciliation strategy development consultant, and I have this podcast that I do every week to share as much knowledge as I can for the sector to benefit and to inform youth responses across Canada. So today we are talking about youth advisory councils, committees, groups, whatever they want to describe themselves as. We're going to talk about it today and not only define what it is, what it's good for, and what are the challenges, but also kind of put you in a space where we build out the experience of the youth who are going to be attending these youth advisory councils and kind of almost use it as an exercise for us to consider how can we better support the young people, the young leaders, really, who are coming through these types of programs. And yeah, so let's jump into it. Alrighty. So, number one, I feel like I have credibility to do this kind of stuff because I'm 27 years old. I started my youth work when I was 15. I was teaching dance. I've worked in shelters. I've gotten my social service worker diploma. Did that for a few years in youth restorative justice, and now I work as a policy analyst, youth policy analyst specifically. And I've participated and had the opportunity to support a lot of youth advisory committees, and I just feel like I've not only seen the great work that they can do, but also like the struggles that come along with the work. There's so many complexities. I mean, like really, like a lot of youth advisory council work is like really just people centered and low barrier, and so there's a lot of things that kind of get added on to that make it a complex experience. So anyway, so I feel like I just have so much experience with this model that we can really kind of put it all into one quick, hopefully less than an hour podcast for y'all to just kind of get a clear basis. Okay, so yeah. All right. Well, So number one, what are they? What the heck is a youth advisory council? So they can be named a lot of different things. So you have the youth advisory councils, committees, groups, or I've even seen youth advisory boards. And all these adjectives at the end of youth advisory just explain the same thing. And that's that it's a collective of young people, likely non-employees who provide recommendations about services and policies that affect them and their peers. So, whatever youth advisory council whatever organization, institution, or whatever that the youth advisory council is part of, they are likely going to inform the operational aspects of it, related to young people. And so typically, being non-employees, these participants are paid in honorariums. An honorarium is essentially, I mean, it's like a wage, but it's more about like honoring somebody's time to say, like, my understanding is that your time's actually worth more than what we're offering you in an honorarium, but we're trying to honor that in whatever capacity we can. And so an honorarium, in my opinion, is an acknowledgement that like you should be paid more, you know what I mean? But we're giving you this because this is what we can offer you. So we're honoring that as much as we can. That is my personal opinion. And so in my experience, these youth who are part of these councils, or the councils themselves, they should meet roughly about once a month, and they tend to be long term. So like they'll have the same group of youth over an extended period of time, maybe over a year, maybe over multiple years. And sometimes their governance structure switches up, right? So like I know for like like in the Aboriginal Friendship Centers, for example, like they kind of cycle through, there's even like an element of voting when it comes to like the National Youth Advisory Council and stuff. And like they kind of have like a more sophisticated governance structure. But city councils have youth advisory councils. So like, each year they might have like cycle through new youth, depending on whatever their priorities are that year. They try to get candidates that are aligned with those priorities. And so anyway, like something I wanted to illustrate here, or use to illustrate, is I found this map, okay? And I'm going to record my screen here. And what you're seeing on the screen right now is a map that I'll put in the description. It's the Youth Council Coalition of Canada, or YCC of Canada. And basically their goal is to kind of like universalize what youth advisory committees are, etc. And so I'm in British Columbia. So if we scroll over into British Columbia, all these like little dots you see with three people on them, these are youth advisory councils. So if we click on it, here we have in Burnaby the British Columbia Youth Council. Let me just read the description for out loud. And for the people listening, not watching on YouTube, the BC Youth Council is a network of youth age 14 to 24 from across British Columbia that provides a platform for change across the province. It's quite broad. Let's go over to the next one. British Columbia's Francophone Youth Council. This youth council's mission is to promote, develop, and represent the interests and potential of British Columbia's French-speaking youth through the development of cultural, educative, and there's more, but it's cut off here. Here we have the Youth Advisory and Action Council of McCreary Centre Society. The YAC, or Youth Advisory Council, is about getting youth out and engaged in their communities and talking about issues that are relevant and important to them. So you can see just in like these three examples, these are all a little different. You know what I mean? Here, fourth example, Youth Advisory Council of New Westminster. The role of the Youth Advisory Committee is to act as a resource to City Council on issues that affecting youth in New Westminster. And so, anyway, my point is that we have this model of youth advisory councils, committees, groups, boards, whatever they want to call themselves. But we don't really have like a clear idea of what youth are going to be doing in this role, right? Like we just kind of whether I'm a city council, I'm a nonprofit, or I'm a Crown Corp, I'm an institution, it's like just to inform whatever I'm doing, okay? But there's so many variations that go along with that, okay? So let me X out of this. I'm going to stop recording my screen here, and and yeah, we're going to get into kind of the variances of them and my experience with them. But what I want to talk about is the strengths of them first. What are they good for, and why we should continue them, etc. So number one, it gets young people involved in their community and more engaged in the sector of their choice. So as you can see on that map there, if you are French-speaking young and British Columbian, then you have an outlet. You have this youth advisory council that you can engage with, and that is kind of like a really good entry point into supporting more French-speaking young British Columbians, right? So not only do they get more engaged, or what being engaged more generally means is about getting connected to the professionals that can support their employment journey, right? So just by nature of being involved in a council, you will likely be exposed to the professionals that are around the field, or around the organization, even if it's not your main contact person, but maybe the executive director's walking out one day and you get to have a short conversation. Maybe one of the other team members from that organization, institution, whatever, comes and gives a talk to the youth advisory council, hey, this is what I do, whatever. And then secondly, they get connected with like-minded peers, I would say the sector is pretty small, you know what I mean? You meet one young Indigenous leader in another province at a conference, you might see them at the conference, at a different conference in another province that same year, it is kind of small in that way. But, if you're just getting involved, then, you might be kind of this might be your first entry point into finding peers who are also interested in this type of advocacy, or just advocacy in general, right? And so, because of these things, this connection into institutions, it positions the young person to be, positions them in a place for more opportunities, right? So it's we have this thing coming up. Hey, would you be open to talking to your youth advisory council about this? Before they go out and try to publicly, just engage more publicly and more broadly, right? It's we already have this pool of young leaders right here. Let's just give them the opportunity, right? It makes sense. And so a second thing about what they're really good for is that it's a way to get into organizational work without requiring formal education from colonial institutions. So it quote unquote demystifies the work or that goes into the operations of that organization. And, I think it really kind of gives young people the opportunity to just see that it's just people working. You know what I mean? I know for me, in policy, like growing up, you kind of have this like weird idea of like what policy is. It's like, we always say like the system, right? But it's like the system is really just like a summation of people, and people are complex. And yeah, people have emotions, and we are subject to all the human things that happen, you know what I mean? Like in policy development, you know what I mean? Sometimes things are very emotionally charged, and other times it's actually very robotic, you know what I mean? Like and so, it just kind of gives them the opportunity to see that like, oh, it's not some well-oiled machine where like we do one thing, we like put our notes into a machine, and then it like makes all these changes, you know what I mean? Like the system is really just something put together by a bunch of people who are not often talking with each other. You know what I mean? Like it's just not like in the form of like the organization themselves, but just like the greater policy sphere that all organizations inform and stuff. And so anyway, you know, it's really good to see that. It's valuable experience to just see that policy and operations of an organization is just people working, just doing their jobs, et cetera, et cetera. And so anyway, this creates an environment for personal growth and inspiration. Like when we see all these professionals doing the kind of work that you want to do, it elevates us, like personally, like, there's that famous saying, it's like you are the summation of the 5 people you hang out most with, right? So it's like if you're around youth advisory councils and you're around the professionals that support young people, like naturally you're going to gonna like elevate your standards of whatever it might be, right? Like, you might tighten up on like the way you talk about things, or like the way you present when you introduce yourself, you know what I mean? Because you see the way that these other people are presenting themselves and building their brands and all this stuff. And so, my last point to this about like why they are good, not to say these are the only reasons they are good, but like why I think they're really good, is that they are a low barrier option to satisfy the appetite for young leaders getting involved in their community, right? So like in my opinion, like young people want to be a part of political discussions and things that are happening in their community, but the problem is that they lack the professional expertise to inform the high level deliverables of policy development. And so youth advisory committees are a great entry point into all that kind of work, right? Like even if they cannot engage at that level of discussion, like when I say high level, what I mean is like manager, director, CEO, you know what I mean? Like, people with like the budgets and hiring potential and, all these things, like, even if you can't engage, inform those discussions like to like a high quality extent, you know what I mean? Like you can just seeing it is going to expose you to what you need to know in order to get to that point, right? So it's just kind of like it's a great entry point for that reason. But, I wouldn't be making a podcast if there wasn't a challenge or there wasn't many challenges. And so, I think the crux of all of this, like bringing it back into what Frayed Feathers does in youth reconciliation strategy development, a lot of this is the policy context, right? So it's like, if it's not the policies of an organization, it's maybe their organizational direction. It's, it's talking about, not only strategy development is not talking about like the concrete goals, right? Because that's more of a plan. We plan to reach this many hirings, or we plan to expand this part of the organization or whatever. Strategy is kind of about having like a thesis almost, or it really is, and just kind of like having a fuzzy goal, and like you're like, I'm not quite sure if we're going to get there, but like I think if we do this type, if we have this approach, then we will get there to that point. And so anyway, like, to my to what I just mentioned about like it's difficult for YACs to inform high level strategy discussion or high level deliverables. It's especially difficult for YACs to inform high level strategy development. And the reason for that is because like, they're already having a struggle to inform the high level discussions or high level deliverables, meaning that like they don't know the organizational realities that the leadership is in, right? So for example, like if you're a nonprofit, like you're subject to like to the funding streams and essentially what the government is doing, right? Like so much of the public sector is government funded. But, like if you're not being paid to learn about policy and what government's doing and all this and that, like it's going to be really difficult. And so like it's hard enough to engage just in the high level discussions of your organization that you're a yak for. Now imagine trying to take that organizational direction and talk about a strategy that goes into a much higher level sector or much more expansive sector, right? It's just anyway, like I think I'm kind of like beating around the bush here, but like you get the point. Like there's like higher level discussions, and it like the higher level we go, the more distant the the yaks are, right? And so, I think this is a problem because, we talked about last week about how a master of policy is kind of the standard education for a policy analyst. And, in that vein, that means you need to go to 6 years of post-secondary and like a grand amount of student debt just to get into the point where you can, like you're at an entry level position of policy development, right? And so, so if we consider that policy analyst being entry level policy position, you know what I mean, and a youth advisory council who likely hasn't gone to any post secondary, it's like you have 6 years of formal education plus all like the other volunteer and other things that people do like along the way, right, to like get experience, self research, documentaries, all that stuff. And so anyway, like the gap is incredible, right? And so, you get to this point where it's like, I work as a youth policy analyst, and I would love to bring more young leaders into the policy discussion, but, we need to find a way to fill this gap. And we need to do it in a way that's like respectful and like honors their time and like builds a good relationship with the people that we're mentoring, right? It's not just about like, you need to get education and like you need to do this and that. It's like, how can we do this in a way that still adheres to our values and principles and gets results, right? So anyway, so like as a policy analyst, like whenever I'm engaging young people, which usually is in the form of youth advisory councils, because that's, in my opinion, where the leaders are, the people who are already passionate and found opportunities, etc. Like policy analysts needs to connect their experiences or what they're saying with research, right? To validate their experience, right? Like, this is social science, at the end of the day, we can't just move forward based on anecdotes. But, like the youth advisory council themselves, imagine if they were the ones who were doing the research and getting and taking their personal experiences and then developing solutions based on like the political realities. Political realities meaning like whatever ministry like serves the function that they want to address, in their advocacy, like kind of what's their level, what's their authority, and then what's their feasibility, right? Like, looking at mandate letters and like kind of really dissecting what exactly they have the appetite to do right now, and et cetera, et cetera. But like that's a lot of time to do that stuff. That's why we have policy analysts, right? So they can be paid to do all that kind of work. But I think a lot of these youth advisory committees are actually kind of like advertised as though they are going to like have you part of policy development and strategy discussions and stuff. And I don't think that it's totally untrue, but I think that, because there's such a gap of policy analysts, like, and I'm using policy analysts as like a benchmark for like someone who can just like inform these discussions, like just generally speaking, you know what I mean? Like they have like a level of expertise. You can ask them a question and like they'll give you like a decent answer, you know what I mean? That's like based in research and what the community's saying, et cetera, et cetera. And so anyway, like you have this gap. And so it's not like the youth advisory council participants tend to not give the level of feedback that organizations, institutions, governments need in order to like develop a solution specifically, so usually what happens is like the youth advisory council tells them what's going on from their experiences, right? Their anecdotes, I was misserved by the system. I fell into a gap in the system because this happened. Maybe I experienced systemic discrimination because my worker was racist and they didn't support me to get on this program during this time of my at this age specifically, and so now I can't get onto this program at this age, and yada yada yada. And so anyway, they share all this stuff, but they don't like have the expertise to give you a solution that is based on what the ministry's feasibility and authority is, right? So anyway, like what happens is the youth get their anecdotes connected into research, and then the organization, government, the institution, Crown Corp, whatever, they're the ones who make the solution. And then they're like, yeah, this is, and they just use the Youth Advisory Council's feedback as like the needs assessment. You know what I mean? Like, look, this is what our young people in our community are experiencing. You need to come up with this solution. You need to fund our solution to yada yada yada. Right. But that's not bad. I think that that's like a good thing. Like you should be engaging your young people to do that stuff. But, if we consider youth reconciliation, really what we need to do is like give the youth the expertise and discourse to communicate about these political challenges, right? Like we need them to elevate their understanding of the sector so that we can get to a point where all of our strategy development, all of our policies are just freaking dope because they have clear solutions given by young Indigenous people that are going to better serve young Indigenous people because it's not disconnected from the experience, right? Like if I'm 20 years old and I'm telling a 40-year-old what's going on in my life, like no disrespect to the 40-year-old, but like they're not a young person in this age, you know what I mean? And I'm 27, like I'm getting to UNC status, and like whenever I officially reach UNC status, I'm not going to talk like I'm a youth and I understand what it was like to be young at this point in time, because like I know from firsthand experience, like the millennials in my life so different from the Gen Zs in my life, you know what I mean? And like my little brother's 8 years difference from me, like he's even much difference from me, and he's still within like the Gen Z era, you know what I mean? So like, and so anyway, like the point is that we shouldn't have youth solutions communicated through people who are not youth. It needs to be youth centered. It needs to be for Indigenous by Indigenous. It needs to be youth Indigenous for youth Indigenous. You know what I'm saying? And so anyway, like kind of what I classify this kind of feedback from, like when youth just kind of talk about their personal experiences but can't really offer like the hard solutions. I call it visionary level expertise, okay? Because, like they are problem aware, right? Like even if they didn't experience like an extreme case of systemic discrimination, they have likely seen it in a variety of ways play out, you know what I mean? And I know for me, like, I didn't come from a great socioeconomic background. And so a lot of my peers were experiencing the same problems that I was, right? So even if I didn't experience it directly, I'm like, oh, well, if I went and tried to do that, that's probably what would have happened to me too. You know what I'm saying? And so anyway, like, I want to respect like this feedback because, like the youth who are in youth advisory councils, even if it's not like the hard solution, they're here, they're giving their expertise, they want to be involved, and they're trying their absolute darndest to like give you what you need as like the person making the strategy. But like they're not getting paid to learn about like the accountabilities and feasibilities of a ministry, you know what I mean? And like a lot of these, I mentioned earlier, like a lot of these youth advisory councils, like they meet once a month, they give honorariums, right? Like it's not a wage. It's like, hey, your time is actually worth more, but we're giving you this honorarium because it's all we can offer you. And, like it saddens me, because I know coming from like working in nonprofit for my whole career is that like, there's so much good spirit in doing these youth advisory councils. It's just that like a lot of these youth advisory councils are like done off like a side of someone's desk, you know what I mean? And like it's not like the main focus for these organizations. It's just like a really nice to have. But, when we consider that like, youth don't really have much opportunities to engage in the policy sector beyond getting a master's or attending a youth advisory council, it's like we can't, I don't want to tokenize their experiences and their expertise just because they took one of the few options that they have to get into the policy discussion. You know, I think that's really unfair. And I think that kind of what I witness sometimes is like institutions getting frustrated that this is the reality. You know what I mean? Like I've heard from other youth that there's been some ministries that have told them straight up, like, youth shouldn't be expected to be paid for shouldn't be expected to be paid every time we engage them, but it's like, this is from a ministry that does childcare, and like that childcare ministry does not have good numbers, as far as like the social outcomes of the people who leave their care. And so this idea that like that youth should not be engaged or should not be paid or shouldn't be expected to be paid after because they're re-engaging with us from about a system that has traumatized them is just ridiculous in my opinion. And so that's why I say like honorariums are really just an acknowledgement that you should be paid more, and like they give honorariums because that's what they can offer. And anyway, like, we need to be very clear about, are we here to support youth voices or are we here to get what we want? Because, like if you're here to support youth voices, then like honestly, I don't think that money should matter. I think having a strength-based perspective is seeing past the transactional experience of being on a youth advisory council, is getting paid for your expertise as a young person, and acknowledging like the values and principles that youth has to come to your damn engagement. You know what I mean? Like yo, like show some respect. Like I was about to swear there. Like seriously though, like show some respect. Like these youth are like trying their hardest. You know what I mean? Like that's like so rude to say something like that. And anyway, like, it kind of irks me. That's why I'm getting all worked up. But anyway, like when we do things like this, when we're just like there to like, it's just like purely transactional, trying to get some feedback, and then so I can form my strategy, and kind of what I was mentioning earlier with the anecdotes and research, and then just plugging in your own solution, is like it becomes very discouraging for these young leaders who are participating in yaks. Like they don't deserve that level of tokenization, and like they are trying to elevate their opinions, like self-researching. They're watching YouTube videos, they're documentaries on Netflix, they're listening to podcasts like mine, hopefully. And yeah, we should definitely be respecting their time and as much as we can, and like and trying to fill the gaps in understanding rather than discrediting them for not spending days of their lives trying to days of their lives, shout out, trying to learn the policy sector like within your ministry. You know what I mean? It's like, bro, provide some education before you ask for their feedback, and maybe you'll have some better results. Anyway, next point is that within the challenges is that not all youth advisory councils are created equal. And what I mean by this is that some of them have a lot of resources via the organization or institution they're attached to, but the premise of the Youth Advisory Council changes to each group. So some are about creating community leaders where they try to plug them deeper into the sector. So like we saw earlier in the map, it was talking about how, talking about how like it was about getting youth into their community and talking more about things that are important to them. I'm just remembering the French one because it's just easy to remember. The Francophone Young Youth Advisory Council for Francophone British Columbians. Like they are, focused more specifically on like, that demographic within the youth, etc., right? So it's like, you can go like very broad or you can go very specific with these councils. But, like you can kind of see in these two examples, with the Francophone example, it's like they're trying to inform, the Youth Advisory Council is informing the projects that are related to young people, right? Like how can we better support young Francophone British Columbians? Whereas the other example, talking about getting them involved in their community and talking about things that are important to them, that's kind of more of a general like leadership type of opportunity where like it's like, hey, we're giving you the creativity to take on whatever sort of project or initiative that you want to, and kind of like giving them the opportunity to take control of it and just build so many soft skills along the way, right? Like, you learn so many things by doing, right? That's why experience is invaluable. And so anyway, like that's what I mean, like the premise of the YAC changes, right? It's like sometimes it's like purely to inform youth components of something, and then other times it's like we want to build young leaders in addition to informing our youth components of things. And so, like with the lack of universal approach to conduct youth advisory committees, it can be difficult to assess the value of it from the outside, right? Like, so if you're like, meaning like if you're a young person looking into a youth advisory council or just like what it is, whatever, if you want to be involved in one, it's like, you're kind of poop out of luck. You know what I mean? Like if the one advisory council in your community is not based on leadership, but you want to like do youth leadership stuff, well, you're kind of shafted. And, kind of to my point earlier, it's like youth want to be part of policy discussions. Like they want to be part of their community. They just don't know how to do it yet. And, most of our system in Canada is based around formal education. Get this level of education, come back to us whenever you have a year of experience, and you can do some outreach stuff with youth. It's like, well, but what if like, I've held a job part-time since I was in high school, and, like I have lived experience, and, like I've experienced all these different things and saw how other caseworkers supported me whenever I went into an organization and stuff like that. And, it's like that youth has so much to offer, you know what I mean? And so anyway, like we want to create, these youth advisory councils are like the entry point, but also one of the only opportunities they have to get in part of these discussions, right? And so, like there needs to be a universal approach so that people actually know what they're signing up for whenever they get into it, right? So, yeah, and once again goes back to like respecting what the youth want to do. And so anyway, last point about the challenge, and this is kind of like this is like the foundation for a lot of other challenges, is that there's only that the pay is not great, and there's only so much a non-employee can offer to an organization or institution. So, like if you're not, so like I mentioned earlier, how like youth advisory committees are often non-employees who are informing some operational function of the organization, typically the youth-centered items. And so, there's only so much someone who is not part of the regular operations can offer to you, right? And so these youth advisory committees don't have like a reason to have like part-time or full-time wages included in them, and so they tend to have short hours and irregular meeting schedules. So it's not a reliable income. Even if you pay like $100 an hour, $50 an hour, it's like if you're only meeting 2 times a month, like, well, like, come on, it's like a nice little bonus on the grocery list, you know what I mean? But it's not going to be something that they're gonna, change their schedule all around for, you know what I mean? Unless they're just super passionate about the work, which does happen. But nonetheless, we shouldn't be tokenizing those people who are willing to like strain themselves, you know what I mean? And so anyway, so it's not reliable income. And so this makes it extremely difficult for youth to attend at all, like in addition to the irregular meeting schedules, all these youth are like since this is not a reliable income, they're forced to do other things, right? Like they're going to do part-time wages. Maybe they're doing some under the table yard work for one of their friends who's got a landscaping business or whatever. And maybe one of them's going to school. Maybe one of them's part-time school. Maybe some of them are actively experiencing homelessness, and so they're very transient, or they have a transient lifestyle, I should say, like transient meaning like periods of stability, periods of non-stability, etc. And so like, it's hard just to get like, you're not meeting like every Wednesday on this day or at this time, you know what I mean? So not only is it not a lot of pay, it's hard to incorporate into your schedule. And so to expect young leaders, people who are quote unquote high functioning, people who are making sacrifices in their life to get ahead, it's pretty difficult to secure this type of candidate when they can confidently work part-time and do full-time studies. You know what I mean? It's like, they're like, bro, like, why would I waste my time whenever I can get so much more reward and value out of these other opportunities, right? But, I think the caveat to that is that I don't think that the youth attending these advisory committees are quote unquote low functioning, but it means that you just need to build their expertise to get to grow into the position, right? Like, filling that gap, like from a master's level, entry level policy position is like requires a master's, and a youth advisory council is typically youth who are like coming fresh out of high school, or like a high school education. And so like we need to give them the mentoring and stuff to get to the level of that policy analyst, just kind of using that as a benchmark. Not everybody has to be a policy analyst. And so, but the problem is that like we, meaning like the public sector, don't enable that type of relationship with youth advisory committees, and it makes it difficult to offer additional guidance, mentorship, and training. I mentioned earlier how like a lot of this work is part of, is often a component of some person's work, right? We're doing this, youth program, and hey, let's have a youth advisory council to kind of check in about it every month. Or, hey, we're thinking about making this program. Let's have a youth advisory council to get some initial feedback, and we can re-engage them throughout the process and whatever. And so anyway, like, a lot of these budgets for these programs or these components of programs, they don't have like a bunch of money to offer part-time, full-time wages, or pay thousands of dollars in training, or do like retreats and, offsites and all these kinds of stuff, like stuff where you really kind of get a lot of that work, that fundamental work done. And so anyway, like, they just kind of are left to be tokenized. You know what I mean? Like they're sitting there so resilient, so passionate, and just don't have like the level of support they need to like fully realize the opportunity. And so, that's why it's discouraging. It's like they're committing their time, they're doing what they can, and it's still not enough. Yet we don't create the opportunity, via securing enough budget to have them use this to the best of their abilities, right? And so, like I don't think that, to the point earlier about how like, someone made a comment about like we shouldn't be youth shouldn't be expected to be paid every time we engage them. It's like okay, but like what are you really offering them in return? I mean, like you're like want them to give you feedback, valuable youth feedback that is so hard to get. And yet like we're not offering them anything that is substantial. You know what I mean? Like that's going to like give them the opportunity to elevate their circumstances to the point where they can start, doing their own initiatives like for young people and stuff like that. And it really hurts. It sucks because like I feel that a lot of the coordinators of these programs understand the value of youth voice, and like they got into this work because all the reasons that I did. They're just passionate about young people working. For me, youth reconciliation, being Indigenous, but they're not given the resources to make it as awesome as possible. So yeah, that's why it sucks, because it's like I see under the hood, I guess. You know what I mean? I see the visionary experiences of the youth. I see the the enjoyment they get from being around their peers and for being part of this organization, and like, oh wow, this is so cool, like what cool level of exposure, maybe they get to do a presentation or attend a conference every now and again, and all that stuff like feels really awesome and like is really awesome. But like whenever they want to like, but it's really hard because like you can't approach the organization and say like, hey, like, can we do more? It's like, well, usually the answer is no. It's just kind of like when things come up, and that irregularity, eventually, that youth leader who you had their attention and commitment from for some time is probably going to go on to a different opportunity, and and I don't want that. I want them to stay around and like continue to inform the organization, and like the longer they're around, the higher quality feedback they'll give, and then like that's how we break the mold of like, only getting their anecdotes, connecting it to research, and then offering our own solution based on what they told us. You know what I mean? Like the more mentoring, training, and stuff we offer to young people in these advisory council positions, the better results we will get in our higher level deliverables. And then therefore everybody wins, right? So like really it kind of comes down to like being able to offer like an amazing offer. Really, like, give high honorariums, give them higher hours, give them the opportunity to be creative with their learning experience, and you be willing and malleable to support them in the way that they want to be supported. You know what I mean? Like a big thing about young people, working with young people, especially young people with like little like work life experience, quote unquote, is like, you kind of have to like, it's almost like making a process with them is the learning experience, right? So it's like, like they're learning what it means to be professional and what it means to like have deadlines and manage your calendar and workload. You know what I mean? And so like just by nature of like having meetings with them, having them accountable to like having pre-read material, them explaining their solutions to you, learning how to communicate with people in a way that has them understand each other, all these like very valuable soft skills that we don't consider whenever we're looking at someone's resume, young people will learn this by just having the experience. And so, I'd like to kind of see some more opportunities to not only look at youth advisory councils as like a program based approach of like, hey, we're doing this specific thing, you know what I mean? Here's the very limited opportunity, and make it more procedural. How can we include young people into the procedures of our operation and like have them shadow us, and we can mentor them, and like they can just see all the work happening, and not like through this funnel of like, you're here on the council and like we support young people, and like, oh my God, your voice is so valuable. Thank you for coming. And like, like just be part of the work and like actually have accountabilities and like be forced to elevate to their environment. You know what I mean? So anyway, in conclusion, if you're considering implementing a youth advisory council for your work, I would please consider how to improve this model, because I feel like it's overplayed. If you already have a youth advisory council in place, consider how you can support them to excel in this role. Check out some of my other podcasts talking about youth engagement and coaching young leaders, and I think you'll learn a thing or two about how to bring it to the next level of the YAC model. So with that, subscribe to my newsletter. It comes out every 2 weeks, and I usually create some sort of tool, whether it be like a checklist, some talking points, an outline of something. And yeah, so it's just kind of like just tools, articles to support your understanding of youth reconciliation strategy development. What else do I got going on? I don't know. I think that's it. Peace.